Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm happy to welcome you to today's webinar, today's Greenzilla Academy webinar. This is already our third webinar on the topic of compliance. And if you missed the other two and any other webinars, so you can watch them on our YouTube channel. This time we put the city of Cape Town on the spot, and we want to discuss the SSEG process in the city of Cape Town. But before we start, I just want to give a big thank you to all of our alumni, because without you, we would not be able to organize this free webinar. So a big thank you to all the Green alumni. I will be your moderator today. I am about to say as usual, and Alex and Sakani will assist me. So they will handle the chats, they will check the questions, and they will also read out the questions. And you as the audience, so you can use the chat function in Teams and place your question. And we will have a discussion with our guests today with Ismail Jefferies from the city of Cape Town and Junior Le Grange. Actually, I never ask how to pronounce your name correctly, Junior. And we will have time. So we will have that discussion 45 minutes. And at the end, we will have time for your questions. Yeah, I think that's it. So from the kind of house rules. And now I want to start with my first questions. And we already asked you in the alumni groups what you want us to ask, especially Ishmael. And the most burning question were how the changes from Eskom, so regarding the small scale generators, so how that changes influence the whole SSEG process for the city of Cape Town. So maybe Ismail wants to start.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity. Yes, so as you have indicated, Eskom has made a big announcement and it's now hot off the press information out there, and everybody, we've been inundated with queries also from our side as to what is the City of Cape Town's position regarding the press release from Eskom, where they've basically indicated that they will no longer require a professional registered person to sign off, and only the electricians that they would require. So our position remains the same as we've had it all along since, I think, 2018-19, when we have started with this whole process, where we have indicated that there is currently this gap in the SANS wiring code document, where for the SSEG systems, particularly section 7.12 within the SANS 10142-1 code does not cover the integration, generation, and synchronization of those systems. And it's for that reason that we have introduced the need for a registered person to be able to cover that gap that's in there. And as we have now, November 2021, the part 2 of SANS was released, but then unfortunately in February 22 was withdrawn again due to protocol not being followed. And if there was no problem with that document, we would have most probably gone with what that document indicated. But because unfortunately it was revoked and no longer applicable for the industry, so nothing have actually changed until since then, basically until now. And therefore, our position still remains the same until the document comes out, the part 2, or however those changes is going to be incorporated into the current SANS wiring code. We basically remain with our position. Thanks.
Maybe so. I mean, when we had our last meeting, so the last webinar, so we were all in agreement, so that Eskom was right or Eskom has, because of the grid code and because of them owning the grid, so that they are in the position to request the PR Inch to sign off the solar system. But now that they withdrawn it, so why is the city of Cape Town continuing to ask for it?
Yes, so they actually didn't indicate in detail in the press release as to why, other than saying, the cost factor attached to the registered person for that. So it looks like from their statement release, it looks like they are basically doing it because of wanting to reduce the cost to the residential market. But in our instance, they've got the prerogative as a licensed distributor, obviously, to make that call because it's their network and it will obviously be their decision. And similarly, as you know, now all other municipalities basically can decide what position that they take. But from our side is that the costing factor cannot override the safety factor. And I think that is the main reason why we still remain with our position until we can see that the gap that I've indicated is thoroughly covered within the part 2 of the SENS document. And if you look at the document that was actually released in November 21, you will see in that document the test report did cover the SSEG generation, integration, and synchronization components within that test report. So we would be very happy, basically, once that the new version of that does get released, for us to then, go into that direction where we can also consider the removal of the ex-registered person for residential systems.
Yeah. When we discussed that, Junior, when we discussed that in our pre-meeting, that you kind of said, and as a certified electrician and trainer of Green Solar Academy, so that you understand that the city of Cape Town want to protect the infrastructure. So, but maybe you can come in a little bit more into the topic and add to what Ismail said.
Yeah, I think ultimately it's very clear from the city's perspective as to what their mandate is, and it's simply that they need to protect the infrastructure, and they've got a responsibility to each homeowner to do so. And then the homeowner from their side has their legal responsibility towards the city, because they are actually in a contract between then distributor and the consumer in that end. So yeah, I'm fully supportive of what Eskom has allowed. I think it will kind of lift a lot of the restriction on the residential solar market and in small commercial, because I do believe they've lifted that requirement up to 50 kVA, if I'm not mistaken. And I think it makes sense to move that in that direction in the future. But I also understand the city's stance specifically with regards to the latest SANS 10142 not necessarily allowing for those three various points to actually be governed. I am, however, of the notion that I do think SANS 60364 does allude to interconnection, distribution, and synchronization. And yeah, I'm speaking under correction now.
Ismail, you are nodding, so do you want to add to that? If not,
Yes, so the IC or the CN 60364.7.12 document, as Junior indicated, does talk about your PV arrays, your DC systems, your combiners, etc., etc. But the important part here is that it needs to be as per the electrical installation regulations, specifically now I'm referring to clause 7, where it should be in the form of a test report approved by the chief inspector. And how does that get done is basically when it gets published via the SANS document. So what we see now currently is, for example, that lots of addendums are being added to the current test report. But like I say, from a electrical installation regulation perspective, that should be as a part of an approved test report. And not, it becomes then difficult for us as a utility to manage that, because now the one has got certain items within that test report which the other one doesn't have, and some of the stuff that you would want to see in there is not in there. And that is why we've got regulations to, ensure consistency, and, that the various aspects that needs to be covered are covered. And it's for that reason why we say this, that once the part 2 comes out, we will have no problem, in terms of changing our position. But currently, for those reasons, and from a safety perspective, from a network perspective, we cannot allow it, because what we're also trying to achieve by this is not obviously to make things difficult on the customer, but to ensure that there is legal liability also at the end of the day. Because if a house burns down tomorrow, then who's going to stand in court, for example, saying who signed off the system and what authority those persons had and who was responsible for what? So it's also what we doing is looking at the best interest of the consumer. It might not seem that way, specifically if you talk about the cost, but then also remember, we are unfortunately not in control of the cost, which the registered persons, nor even the electrical contractors charge the customers for the work that they need to do.
I actually so when we planned to discuss the city of Cape Town in this format, or the compliance topic with the city of Cape Town, so we decided that before Eskom came out with a press release. And one reason also to discuss about the city, or with the press release and the changes they announced in the press release, so that they don't need they don't want it's not any more necessary that the PR Inch is signing off for small SSEGs up to 50 kVA. So, and our point was, we discussed that with different installers in the city of Cape Town, and one even said to me that he actually sees that as an added value, that the PR Inch is coming to the system and signing off. And he has a PR Inch with him, he works for a long time already, and he's also a Green alumni, offers this as a service for PV installers. And if there's something wrong, this guy comes to the site and he will see it, because he saw a lot of wrong installation. He has an eye to spot the mistakes, which is then, as you said, an added value also for the client. And it's also kind of it's affordable. So and this is what I wanted to understand how you see it. I mean, the city of Cape Town started that quite a while ago already, and an original question would have been, so how comes that it is possible in Cape Town and in the rest of the country everybody says it's too expensive, it does not make sense, it's not affordable. So why did you decide to go that way, and how does it work? I mean, how is the feedback from the installers also and the clients?
So as you've indicated, obviously we get feedback from clients saying, most of the time is, we will most probably get negative feedback in the sense that the customer system is, for example, tripping the breaker or the network circuit breaker on our side, or the meter becomes faulty or tripping. And with the very first inspection, you'll find that a PV system was installed, customer didn't apply, and we don't even know what type of system it is. But because we see the PV system, we then definitely know it's exporting to the grid. And because our meters are so sensitive, it trips out, for example. So immediately then there's nothing wrong with our meter, but the customer is now sitting with out of supply. installer is gone. So how do we now rectify this, for example? So it's only at that time when we unfortunately do get involved. But once we now start working with those type of customers to get them to at least switch off their system, where we are then able to put back the network or the breaker, and it then obviously stays on, there's already proof that can you say there's nothing wrong with our supply is actually as a result of the PV system that was installed. So somebody now needs to obviously come and do the reverse flow blocking settings and make sure that the system is not exporting. And this is the type of interactions we start having, and then we tell them, but you need a reputable electrician for the installation part. You also need a reputable registered person, and we refer them to the necessary websites, and and eventually with that type of engagements, they eventually get it right. And once it's right, it's now I can see, for example, the need for these people, for example. So it's in that manner where you basically, where the customer also basically see the advantages of having the right people coming to these type of installations. You will find that, like I've mentioned, on the costing side, we do not have too much control, unfortunately, on that. But this is also a part we would like to work with um, is the national regulatory standards, even though we know it's very informative. It's not like compulsory for specifically municipalities in Eskom, but regulatory standards have been widely adopted by a lot of municipalities, including us. For example, the NRS 097-2-1, which is for the generator specifications or inverter specifications. In the part 2-3, which is a simplified method that we use to determine the limits to ensure that at the end of the day, our network will not be negatively affected. So with that in mind, coming up with a standard for registered professional persons, guiding then the customer as well as the registered person in terms of what's their responsibility, the liability, and maybe adding the costing factor to it as a guideline for the industry, and in that way almost like controlling the cost aspects, because we find that somebody installing a small 5 kVA system versus somebody installing a 100 kVA system, you would expect the cost to be much different. However, for the smaller systems, the guys are still charging an arm and a leg, and that is what we need to get right. And once we get it right, we should not then be sitting with these type of discussions in terms of why do you need a registered person, for example.
Yeah. I mean, of course, a small system usually has a higher price per kilowatt peak than a big system. But I think there's still, I mean, a lot of different installers in the game. But maybe we come to, I mean, the whole thing is to speak about the process in the city of Cape Town. And as we are active all over the country, we also have guests not only from the Western Cape in the room, and therefore I would like to ask Junior maybe to talk us a little bit through the process. And we also had some, and we discussed that, so some changes in the application process in the city of Cape Town in the last 2 years. And maybe Junior, you could give us a short explanation what has to be done, who has to do what.
Yeah, so I'm sure a lot of the local Western Cape and specifically City of Cape Town installers remember the days of having to fill in a PDF document and mail it through, and the massive long waiting periods. And the City of Cape Town have been very well prepared and kind of in rolling out the online system, linking it with e-services online for the client and the installer and the professional team to work together to get the SSEG registered properly. And if you look at the process, it's quite simple. If the existing City of Cape Town client is not yet signed up for e-services, They then have to sign up for e-services, which also gives them the ability to do many other online services as City of Cape Town clients, including water, electrical, refuse, those types of things, logging complaints, etc. Then they have to activate energy services on the e-services profile, after which they then can go to the energy services section under e-services. They will then grant a proxy authorization to a third party who will then be able to submit the application on their behalf. Quite often, the homeowner, the end user, doesn't necessarily have the technical knowledge to understand all the jargon used in some of the documents that need to be submitted. And in that sense, it's a good opportunity for the installer, the electrician, and the engineer to work together to get the application over the line for the end user. So then they can either submit the application themselves or have the third party submit it on their behalf. But there is an extra layer of communication that comes in if they want to do it themselves. That would obviously be hand in hand with the installer. They then the service provider receives the proxy, and we can then track the progress of the application online. And quite soon after the submission of the necessary submissions of documentation for the application, the permission to install or PTI letter gets received by email to the proxy and the owner, whereafter the solar installation can get installed. Once the installation is complete, there is a small three-step part that commences. So the service provider or the property owner uploads the certificate of compliance issued by the electrical contractor. The service provider or the property owner then reviews and accepts the terms and conditions of the supplemental contract. Remember, as I mentioned earlier at the start, there is in fact a legal contract between the City of Cape Town in this instance, or the local municipality, and the client, who's the end user of the distribution network. Then the EXA registered professional logs onto e-services, and they can complete the commissioning report and submit it accordingly with all of the necessary pictures and proof documents of that installation's compliance and commission readiness. Shortly whereafter, they should receive a commissioning approval letter, and then we can officially switch the solar PV system on. And after that, or by this stage already, we've had scenarios, and Ismail, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but where should there be a need for a meter replacement, this can then already start taking place, or at least then where necessary, a quote can be given by the city for that meter replacement. And if it's a case of simply replacing the customer user interface, then it's fairly simple. Alternatively, that meter would then have to be moved into the street kiosk, and a new CIU unit needs to be installed.
Okay.
I hope that answers the question.
That answers the question, but so how you explained it just now, so it sounded like the EXA registered person, the PRING, just has to log in online and check everything online. So the person does not have to go to the site.
Well, technically speaking, they have to lawfully submit that commissioning report, have to verify the information that they are in fact confirming as correct and in a positive nature. So that's up to the registered engineer to then do his due diligence on site to test the various points. So whether it is power curtailment, feedback prevention, disconnect, reconnect times, all of those various points that are a requirement on the commissioning report.
So then, Ismail, you are nodding. So that means that so the idea is that the person goes on site, checks the systems, and does the due diligence, and then completes the registration.
Yes, definitely. Specifically on the maximum export capacity, where customers are intending to export, that person would need to make sure that that limits, as per the permission to install letter is set, because we then give them maximum export level. We indicate that on the permission to install letter, and the engineer doing the settings must ensure that that is set to the correct level. Then also very importantly, the maximum charging current needs to be set at 25% of the utility installed capacity, also referred to as the notified maximum demand of the customer. So those are just a few of the important things that the engineer needs to ensure. The other thing is, for example, if the customer do not intend exporting, as Junior indicated, then he needs to ensure that reverse flow blocking is enabled on the system, to make sure that the customer is actually then not going, in our case, going to pay for what he is generating if he still has a prepayment meter, for example. So the prepayment meter becomes almost like another level of protection on our side in the event that the customer actually do export and is not supposed to export, and then that would tell us that obviously the reverse flow blocking was not enabled.
Um, yeah. I just see that we get one question from one of our alumni, Stefan Ortmann, who fits very nicely to what we've discussed just now. And actually, so and maybe I read his question. So he said, "How come that the city of Cape Town sees non-solar trained peer-inch sufficient to sign off for solar trained installation electricians or master installation electrician are not sufficient?" So the whole industry has unacceptable headaches dealing with engineers that have no clue but have been made a requirement. And I think this is a topic what we also discussed in the last webinar. So I mean, what is the so yeah, that it is kind of difficult to say. We have now the electricians. We have like Tsakani could answer that question better than I. So more than 50%, I think, of our participants are electricians. So the electricians are totally arrived in the world of solar. And I would say the peer inch is not yet. So, but yeah, maybe you want to answer Stefan's question.
Yes, so just like we've indicated in the case of the electrical contractors doing the necessary to train and skill themselves by attending the various PV courses. Similarly, if it is an engineer who would like to sign off the system and he has not been operating in that environment or that field, he obviously also needs to ensure that he trains himself, become aware of the necessary requirements before he basically also register himself to become the engineer to sign off a system. So the onus is still on that, similar to the electrical contractor, also on the engineers to basically ensure that they have the necessary expertise and skills to do the work that is required from the engineer in this case.
You are nodding, Junior. Do you want to add to that? Because I would have, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just I feel perhaps I mean, I think the industry is very mature at this stage, and we've come a massive long way just in the short period of time that I've been involved in solar specifically. And there are many others like Stefan Ortmann himself as well, who've got years on me, and I respect that greatly. I do agree with Stefan there, and this coincides with my statement in the pre-meeting on like how do we verify that the electrician is in. I mean, he might have IE behind his name, but that does not necessarily make him suitably trained to sign off on a solar installation, according to me, because you get IE electricians and then you get IE electricians. The former not being equal to the latter, unfortunately. And I'm personally a proponent of IE status, or then in this case, PR Tech registered status, not being the only suitable registration requirement, or at least in conjunction with something else. There should be another layer of verification of who the individual is that's signing off on the system. And this is where Ismail and I have had a conversation regarding how things were and where we're moving towards. And I think ultimately to not get bogged down by what can be, but we are grateful for where it is now.
I also saw, I mean, how that developed and how it changed. But I mean, do you speak as a city with EXA, for instance? Do you speak with the associations of engineers to see how they, I mean, how we can bring them on board? I mean, it's not only Green Solar Academy, a different Savia accredited training provider offer EXA accredited courses. And it is not rocket science, PV. However, you have to know what you do. So are there any discussions going on? So I understand that you say that you want to put it on the client, but yeah, I think it's also good to speak with the engineers and kind of move them in the right direction.
So that we actually see the role of, I see you've got there on your back screen, the South African Institute of Electrical Engineers, which, as you know, is also association very working closely with ICSA, because most of the engineers basically are also registered with the SIIEE. And as you know, they also offer lots of courses basically on the PV systems, the design aspects specifically, the technical requirements, very much in detail, similar to most probably the courses that you also offer. And for that reason, as you know, now for them to be able to gain the CBT points and to acquaint themselves with the latest within the industry. So it's almost like that system is already working. It's just that we must get the discipline in the industry where a person, being even an engineer, but have not actually worked in the environment, suddenly now becomes go and register him on our portal and start signing off. The discipline needs to be with that person to say, what do I know of these systems? Am I capable of doing it? And do I understand also the importance of what I am actually doing? And and he actually knows that based on his registration with ICSA, his conduct becomes the important part in this, and the integrity of his registration, and
Yeah.
therefore can be held liable. So with that process in mind, you would expect that obviously these people are actually, following suit in terms of the requirements. But unfortunately, as we've also seen in industry, this doesn't always happen, unfortunately.
But when you ask them to register, so when they register on the portal, so they do not have to show that they have any experience in solar.
Correct. So the only thing we actually use for them is we go onto the ICSA website. They obviously provide us with the documentation, but we
Yeah.
confirmed at least on the ICSA website specifically in terms of the discipline that they are in, the category, what type of registration, and also the status of the registration. So we check and verify that, and if that is in order, we basically add them onto the database.
Okay. So for all the engineers in the room, so as Ismail spotted, so our courses are SAE or EXA accredited. And if you want to stay compliant, so you can take one of our courses, for instance, the compliant with EXA, I meant. So then you could come to one of our courses, for instance, the compliance of PV system course, but all a lot of other courses also come with CPD points, also the design of PV system. Yeah, I want to go back to one point when Junior explained us the whole process, what has to be done and when to submit what, and then we came to the point with the meter. And so how is it in general? So you so where you said that it has to be checked if the meter needs replacement. So when we have to replace the meter, where do we have to put the meter? Can it be in the house? Has it so, or where at the border of the property? So how does this work?
Yes, okay. So just before we get to the actual metering accommodation, as Junior indicated, we would know if the customer select on the application form, he intends exporting. Once you've registered with e-services and basically go onto the online app and indicate his existing services, he will have noticed that he didn't need to put in the meter number because we would already have that meter details, and we would actually then know what type of meter the customer have, and is he a single phase or three-phase customer. The only thing he would need to add is the size of that supply to indicate to us, is it a 60M or 80M single phase supply or 60M three-phase supply, for example. Once you've indicated he intends exporting, and we now know he's got a prepayment meter, the system actually then automatically generates the code for the meter, which then also gets issued as part of the documentation automatically. Once the customer's made the necessary payment, then obviously you get to the implementation step. So yes, we did change our process in October 23 when we streamlined the whole process to make the online process also much easier for us. We then also introduced the earth boundary box requirement for the metering accommodation on the customer's property side, which we do understand that we actually had lots of issues with that. Again, obviously a costing factor, which we as the city are unfortunately not really involved. It's again, whatever the electrical contractors charge the customers to do those rearrangement of the work to bring the feeder cable or the service connection cable into that metering accommodation box. But we've at least got some good news on that topic, where we are now really looking at that whole standard, and where we want to actually again try and make it easier for our customers, where we were looking to install those into our street furniture, into our kiosk basically. That's now if there are kiosks, if we have a network, underground network with existing kiosks, we will install it in there. And then we've got certain areas where we've got still old networks, which is either LV street front designs or LV mid-block designs, where we know there are no street furniture, for example. In those instances, we have what we refer to as a 5-year plan to underground those networks. So if within that area there is a plan to underground it based on our 5-year plan, and that customer comes in and apply for a system with export, we will then facilitate that network or the kiosk in front to house the meter. With the intention of, because in the future that network will become an underground. In areas where it's not on the 5-year plan, therefore not, in the immediate term, any intention to do it, there we would still unfortunately then request the customer to provide that box until the time we will be able to get to it to underground it. So we're really now looking at rehashing that standard and try and make it easier, which I think will already cater for the majority of the customers, where we are able to then house it within our kiosk.
Okay, so for those who still have to install the meter, so Junior, so what are your experience? Because this is one topic I got from one of the alumni. So, and who said that this is really kind of a burden for the client. So did you have do you have any experience so with projects where you had to add that meter? Do you offer that service? I mean, you are not only a PV installer, but so also offer any electrician services.
Yeah, so we've had a similar scenario, but not in the city of Cape Town jurisdiction as of yet. The closest I've gotten to firsthand having to do this for a client was simply the meter replacement, where they were already undergrounded with their main supply to the property, and the meter was in the street, and it was a simple replacement of the um, CIU unit inside. So there it was fairly simple.
Yeah.
And then where we did have to redo the mains was actually on a site in Plettenberg Bay, where then obviously we would, as electrical contractors, have to reassess the main connection, and preferably actually do that before the installation so that it doesn't come as a surprise to the client after they did the whole SSEG process, but that we would account for it as part of the SSEG installation already, kind of trying to preempt that main connection has to get moved, and provision for the metering unit has to get done in the street kiosk, or then a provision for that kiosk and the metering unit has to be done. So then it becomes a bit of a civil process, having to do trenching, having to reroute the main cable if it is overhead, then to underground, and then obviously cost of the cable and the labor involved, etc., all becomes part of the process. So yeah, I must admit my experience with that is limited
Yeah.
on only that one occasion that we've had to unfortunately do it. But yeah, other than that, I think more on commercial side projects is where this becomes a rather big scenario. We're sitting with a small commercial property where consolidation has to happen, etc., of meters consolidating to one big main supply with multiple units on one earth. But that's a Eskom site, so not City of Cape Town either.
Yeah, but I mean, sometimes this even can be a positive thing for the clients. So because I
Yes,
mean, because they can end up paying far less for the electricity they buy, because when they reconsider the on the tariffs they use and when things are merged. So
for sure. I
yeah.
agree.
I have one point which also fits to the registration. So one of our alumni brought it up in the discussion or in the alumni group before the webinar today. So how is that whole process? Or he kind of explained or brought up the process. So when you change a system, so when you repower the PV generator, for instance, or when you have to change PV modules because of a damage or whatsoever. So how is the process? So is it correct so that when I change my system, or when I have to change, maybe even because of uh, a hail damage or whatsoever, the module, so that I have to go through the complete registration process one more time? I would ask Ismail actually.
Okay. So in our case, for amendments to the system is not necessarily maybe just like you now say you have a module, a PV module that's faulty, you need to replace it, for example. So you're welcome to go ahead and replace that module without having to come and re-register. Where we need to be able to get customers to do amendments. If he, for example, installed a 5 kVA and for whatever reason he intends to upgrade it to a 8 kVA or any bigger system or even lower, or the customer didn't initially installed batteries and now he's changing from to a hybrid system from just a normal grid type PV with the inverter, then including batteries, because then we don't have that battery details and we need that information. Or is adding batteries, for example, or even adding panels. Maybe at the time for a 8 kVA system he had maybe only 10 panels and now he is in a position to add the extra 8, for example. So in those instances, we basically need the customer then to complete an amendment form so that we know exactly what's installed.
But it's not the complete process. So how would that then work?
So if the customer, for example, applied already online and has got an existing approved system, he will go online again. He will see his exact system that was approved and is able basically to amend that system or that application with additional information.
And would he then also need the PR inch to sign everything off one more time?
So yes, the electrical contractor and the registration requirements becomes applicable again, correct?
Yeah. So, and then it sounds relatively easy for a system which was installed recently, only it comes with a cost because you need the COC and the PR inch. But how is it then with the older systems? So, yeah, if the system was installed like 4 years, 5 years ago before we had the online registration system.
Also, then it depends. As you know, we've started many years with our registration process. So, and as well as a very wide, extensive media campaign to ensure that our customers do come forward and register their systems. We had cutoff dates, for example, October 23, where we still allowed all the customers with the previous type of systems, for example, the alternative supply type of systems or off-grid systems, UPS systems, which we've all allowed at that time. We basically allowed them to come and apply, register it with us in order for us to basically run the process of ensuring it's compliant. So based on that, we expect that those systems, for example, if a customer have a very old system, which is maybe even a alternative or a off-grid system, or alternative system, that they would have an application. And now, if they would want to basically amend that system, all those systems would have been done manually. So it wouldn't be on the online system. We will then now require them to just basically go online and submit the new system online. We will pick up on our side for that particular property the details of the existing system, and we will see exactly what's the difference and what the customer is applying for now and what's different from what he has got installed. If they didn't register, then obviously that becomes a problem, because obviously then it makes the existing system a non-compliant system, which, that will form a different process in terms of us having to then work with the customer to make sure that system becomes compliant.
Yeah. Well, sounds quite streamlined, straightforward, but maybe once in a while a bit costly. It's time now to check questions from the audience. So we have one more question definitely here. But so if you have more questions, please type them in the question and answer session. So there is one from Mick. So Alex, do you help me to read it out?
Absolutely. Firstly, Mick asked, can the principle not be adopted that for modifications of panels and or batteries, that the system owner only has to merely inform City of Cape Town rather than applying for approval again? He says, I understand that a change of the inverter or inverters warrants a reapproval, but I don't see the reason that, say, extra panels or another battery should require approval. That's the first part. You can speak to that, then I'll give you a second part.
Thanks, Alex.
So I think it's important to note that, as we've indicated right at the beginning, why we have this registration process. We need to know what is being installed on the customer side, which, as we now know, it's all grid-tied systems in parallel with our grid, which affect the grid and it's got an impact to the grid. So now, say for example, the customer only indicated I've got 10 panels and it is now adding another 10. We need to know that because ultimately now he's doubled the capacity of the generation to that inverter. So therefore, we need to now know that this customer is no longer, for argument's sake, a 5 kVA installation. This is now an 8 kVA installation. So, for example, we need to get that information to know what is also being generated, even though sometimes the inverter itself might not need to be replaced, but we need to know how many panels is also on there because that becomes also part of the generating equipment. The inverter cannot generate without the PV. Then on the battery is very similar. If the customer has got one battery versus 3 batteries, that's important for us. Why? That is why we have what we refer to the maximum charging current limits on those batteries. Because in the event of a fault or load shedding, what we actually, this is now actually a true experience from our side during the load shedding time, 2023, when we had almost every day load shedding and at the worst stages we could think of, 4 to 6. What we've experienced in the suburb was that after a load shedding stage 4, supply came back on, that suburb tripped out immediately due to cold load pickup. And that was all the batteries that needed to be charged as a result of the power coming back to the network. And we couldn't get that network back in. We had to basically do systematic switching, which took us another 2 hours, which means that customers were out for another load shedding stage, basically, before we could get the network back. But there was nothing wrong with the network. Cables, circuit breakers, mini sizes, all within spec. And this is basically just a good example of how these systems have an impact onto the network. And then ultimately affects the very same customer that doesn't want to register, for example, or doesn't want to submit the required documentation for us to know what is the impact of all those systems on the network. Do we need to now start looking at upgrading this network? Is the transformer still good enough to handle the maximum export of all those customers connected to the transformer? So that's the impact, and for that reason, we need to have that details to make those studies and analysis onto the network.
Okay, and then thank you for that part. And in a lead on, Mick said, why should a PR engineer have to sign off on a modification that affects only panels or batteries?
So once again, the settings would have changed. You no longer now have only one battery. You've got 3 batteries. You've changed the kilowatt rating from 5 to 15 or to 20. The maximum charging current now changes, for example. So it's those type of things. It's not as simple as just plugging it in and you don't do the necessary changes on the setting side. So that needs to be done. Therefore, you need that person to be able to sign it off, or to do it at least and sign it off.
And I think so if I understood it right, Ismail, so you said if it's just if my one example, so that there was like whatever damage to the modules, and when you have a 5 kilowatt peak generator and you replace it with 5 kilowatt peak, so then no additional paperwork is needed, or so I mean, when is it needed? I mean, I totally understand. So all the examples you gave. So when the generator is bigger, when the battery is bigger, when the inverter is bigger or even smaller. So all that influences the grid and the whole system. So, but it's just a replacement of a 5 kilowatt. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Junior. Yes.
Can I
I
maybe
just
help
wanted to
answer
say
that
just a replacement of a
from
5 kilowatt system with a 5 kilowatt system. So yeah.
Yeah, so maybe from a purely electrical compliance point of view, I mean, I would regard even just replacing one module as a fairly major alteration to the electrical system of that property. So we would generally, replacing a plug socket is a minor alteration. I'm not patently changing the electrical installation. I'm not taking it apart and putting it back together. But if by the time I'm to take apart a section of a solar and then reconnecting it to the inverter.
Now we lose you a little bit. So
Sorry. Can you
okay,
hear
now
now?
you're back. Yeah. So yeah, only the last
Apologize.
sentence. Yeah.
So basically, if I now reconnect that system to the new modules, I've just what I would deem a major alteration to the electrical installation, because I've had to take wiring apart, I've had to put it together again. I've taken modules off the roof, put modules on the roof, and I would then have to reissue a certificate of compliance, or at least do a supplementary certificate to that installation. And then it makes logical sense for me to say, if the COC is changed for the homeowner, that the City of Cape Town, for their administrative filing, then also have that document on hand for their due diligence. And then again, to ensure that earthing stays in place on the module, to ensure that if and where there is a lighting protection system, that it hasn't been compromised, if and where there is other generation, I would almost say portfolios or sources on the property, that they haven't been compromised, that the engineer then comes out, or in my opinion, then the competent person, I don't agree that it has to be an engineer, but the competent person then has to come out and reissue the commissioning report, because he's commissioning a totally different installation than what was originally commissioned. Yeah, I'm sorry, that was a very long-winded answer.
Yeah, but very clear, actually. Ismail, so can you confirm or can you sign what Junior said, or?
Yes, no, so he's right in terms of there's definitely a COC needed in terms of those strings that needs to be replaced or changed. But I think the example you've made in terms of this 5 kVA system remains a 5 kVA system. There was 10 panels, it still remains 10 panels. It was 2 550 watt panels that was replaced with 250 watt, 550 watt panels. So overall, from our side, where we're sitting, there's no change really. It still remains a 5 kVA system, being export or no export. That's what we're on about. But the moment you start changing or adding to the system, making it bigger or smaller, then we need to know about it, because that is where, like I say, we've got the impact on our side.
So would it then be necessary to send you or to upload the COC?
I would say we for if the customer has got it already on our system, at least the COC, but there wouldn't be an engineer required to basically, because nothing on the inverter settings changes for example. So the minimum there is that supplementary COC for that work that was done.
Thank you. We actually have one more question, but we also have only 1 more minute. So yeah, maybe instead of opening the new topic, sorry, Stefan, I want like one sentence from both of you to answer the question. So where do you see the compliance landscape in South Africa in 10 years?
So I see it from outside, from where we're sitting, it will become even more a streamlined process. So it will become much easier, specifically on the residential side. Based on our records, we know that 90% of our applications are residential applications. Hence, we have streamlined our online system to actually cater for exactly just that. Making it very easy. Customers don't need to submit us single line diagrams, for example, showing how they basically have designed the system and how they will interconnect and parallel with our network and where the various type of equipment is sitting, for example. We provided the single line. You basically just make sure that it is in accordance to that. And in terms of the limits, as per the simplified method, we basically just will need to know from you what is your size of supply, and we then make known the limits to you instead of you indicating I'm going to export 3.5 MVA. In terms of the compliance, we hope that with this SANS working group, that work can be concluded very, very soon, so that on the industry side, we can start, relaxing the requirements of the registered persons. I think it's most probably worthwhile also to mention that we have introduced, as part of the registered persons, the pure technician, which is, the technologist or the engineer or the certificated engineer. We've allowed the pure technician registered person to sign off residential systems to assist specifically residential customers with the cost aspect. So I think a lot of people maybe don't understand that difference, but it is quite an important one to actually mention, and that's how we try to assist with that, because their fees and tariffs is less than what it is, for example, for engineer and for a technologist. But we hope as we move forward with this, that we will have a much more a streamlined process, and where we envisage ourselves moving forward is this smart grid, this with the smart technology. We want everybody to have an approved inverter installed on his system, where we are able as a utility to be able to communicate with their customers' equipment moving forward, creating, the networks going to become dynamic. We've got prosumers, we've got the current moving in both directions. We don't have the conventional type of network where the current was just flowing in one direction. We can basically see how, with this maximum export of 375 megawatts that we have on our network, we want to get to that point, how that can assist us from a utility perspective and also the customer side. So that is where we moving forward with this visionary approach in terms of the technology, smart cities, dynamic networks, which will be both beneficial to the utility as well as the customers.
Oh, it was a very long sentence, but very nice vision. So, Junior, maybe a bit shorter. Thank you, Ismail.
Yes.
That's very. So, where do you see so
I
compliance and
concur.
you concur? Smart grid, it is.
Yes, smart grid it is, and I think education is at the order of the day. Ultimately, education, I believe, is power, and I was brought up in a way that says if someone taught you to do something with these, no one can take it away from you, and knowledge is power.
Thank you. Well, thank you. That was quite interesting. I think it gave us a nice insight in how things are done, why things changed, what will change, what comes next. And I hope that everybody enjoyed the webinar. And as usual, keep on sending us questions, keep on sending us your topic. So we try to have one more webinar, or we want to have one more webinar on the topic compliance, and we want to have a representative from SAE or EXA in the room, or the ECA and Eskom. But it's yeah, we are trying to get the right people on board. So fingers crossed, and thank you for being with us today. Bye. Thank you, Junior. Thank you, Ismail.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Pleasure.
And
Ishmael.
Alex
Bye.
and
Thank you,
Sakani.
Antje.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.